Do protests have to be disruptive? Whether it's taking over a government office, or shutting down Wall Street, or infiltrating a TV audience to force a confrontation, political protests can be awfully inconvenient. And sometimes the people who are being protested already agree with the protesters. What is the point of that? If you have a problem, you can work hand in hand with powerful institutions that can help, through lobbying or meetings or petitions or fancy dinners. But that doesn't always work. Powerful people don't like to talk about issues that make them uncomfortable. For example, in 1982, Reagan's press secretary was asked if the president was aware of the AIDS crisis, and he just laughed and moved on to something else. Issues that matter to people at the margins can get laughed at or forgotten or set aside for more palatable topics. The issues get stuck. So how do you get it unstuck? Well, it takes an uncomfortable action to get people to talk about uncomfortable topics. For example, in the 80s, the Reagan White House was laughing about HIV. So ACT UP forced them to take it more seriously. They shut down Wall Street. They demanded better treatment options and more access to medicine and a national AIDS policy. And within just a few months, Surgeon General C. Everett Koop sent a mailer to every home in America about AIDS. And it's great when people in power already agree with protesters, but agreeing isn't the same as taking action. Sometimes important issues can still get marginalized. It takes a disruptive push to bring those issues from the margins to the center of everyone's attention. And that's why these protesters chained themselves to the White House fence in 2011. They were protesting Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which Obama agreed should have been repealed. But nothing was happening. So this group that included Dan Choi took action. Obviously, one protest all by itself doesn't solve a whole problem, but it keeps the conversation going. It keeps centering the issue, keeping it moving so it never gets stuck. And within a year, Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal was signed into law. Being rude or disobedient or confrontational is particularly effective for disadvantaged people who just have no other access to power. For example, we tend to think of Stonewall as being the foundation of the LGBT liberation movement, but there was a riot at Compton's cafeteria 3 years earlier in San Francisco. For years, trans people had been enduring police harassment, and one night a cop tried to arrest a trans woman just for being out in public. People fought back in a violent multi-day protest, and it was scary and messy, but immediately, the San Francisco Police Department established COG, the country's first known trans support group, as well as the first social service agency dedicated to trans people. Compare the Compton's cafeteria riot to the polite, respectable rallies of the 1960s. During the 1960s, Frank Kameny organized some very professional, respectable protests in Washington, D.C., and although they formed the basis of later actions, you probably never heard of them. And neither did anybody at the time. So Frank stepped up his tactics. In 1970, he protested the American Psychiatric Association's annual meeting to try to get them to delist homosexuality as a mental illness. They didn't really pay enough attention, so the next year, he infiltrated the meeting, stormed the stage, grabbed the microphone, and started issuing demands. That's when things changed. The following year, the APA invited him in to speak. And the year after that, the APA took homosexuality out of the DSM. Every major advancement for people on the margins has required some disobedience. Yeah, it makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes it makes allies uncomfortable. Sometimes it makes the people doing the action uncomfortable. But that discomfort is the point. It would be nice if there was a polite, palatable way for people who have limited access to power to effect change without hurting anyone's feelings. But when powerful people aren't willing to talk about important issues, those issues are stuck, and they're never going to get any momentum unless you give them a strong shove. It's what we've seen with LGBT liberation, with Occupy Wall Street, with Black Lives Matter. It even goes back to suffragettes who were beaten and killed when they tried to access government buildings. At the time, suffragettes were accused of militant hysteria. Woodrow Wilson called them obnoxious. But, as Laurel Thatcher Ulrich wrote, well-behaved women seldom make history. I'd expand that to say that if you're a member of any group that's been forgotten or marginalized or set aside or just pushed out, then you're never going to change anything by following all of the rules. The rules are what marginalized you in the first place, and you're going to have to break a few of them if you want to make history, and more importantly, change the future. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe here on YouTube for more videos, and check out my 2 podcasts. There's The Sewers of Paris, which is full of revealing stories about the entertainment that changed the lives of gay men, and Defining Marriage features personal stories behind the fight for marriage equality. You can also leave a comment on this video and tweet at me at Matt Baum. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to stop being polite and start getting real.